Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to share with you our discussion on the principles of justice and environmentalism framework. We'll be exploring how climate justice intersects with the moral duties of developed nations. Our focus will also include ethical considerations relevant to health science professionals. Over the next few minutes, we'll cover the key concepts behind climate justice, the responsibilities of different nations, and the legal and ethical frameworks that guide us. So, let's get started. Climate change is often discussed as an environmental issue, but today I want to emphasize that it's much more than that. It's actually a profound moral dilemma of our time. When we talk about climate change, we're really talking about the ethical choices we make, about how we treat our planet, future generations, and vulnerable communities. This slide calls it an ethical challenge, and that's because addressing climate change requires us to confront difficult questions about responsibility and justice. Who should bear the burden of reducing emissions? How do we ensure that our actions are fair to those most affected? Understanding it as an ethical issue helps us see that this isn't just about science or policy, it's about our values and morals. It's about making the right choices, not just the easy ones, for the health of our planet and future generations. So, as we move through this presentation, keep in mind that tackling climate change is fundamentally about moral responsibility, something we all have a part in. When we look at the impact of emissions, it's striking to see how minimal our contributions can sometimes lead to the greatest suffering. For example, forced migration is now a reality for millions of people around the world, driven largely by climate-related factors. Communities in Africa and Asia are especially hard hit, facing severe droughts and devastating floods that threaten their very livelihoods. What's important to understand here is that developed nations, which have contributed the most to greenhouse gas emissions through their industrial activities over history, are not the ones suffering the worst consequences. Instead, it's the low-emitting countries that are most vulnerable and suffering the harshest impacts. This highlights a clear environmental inequity, an imbalance where those least responsible are bearing the brunt of climate change. This slide really underscores the global imbalance at the heart of our climate crisis, highlighting how responsibility and impact are distributed unevenly across the world. It's a stark reminder of why addressing environmental inequality is so crucial in our efforts to find fair and effective solutions. When we think about ethical duties, it's important to remember that they go beyond just the present moment. We have a responsibility to ensure that future generations are protected from worsening issues like food insecurity and water scarcity. This is where the concept of intergenerational equity comes into play. It emphasizes that justice isn't just about today's needs, but also about safeguarding resources and opportunities for those who come after us. A key point here is the idea of fairness and responsibility. Specifically, justice requires that those who have historically caused harm, like high-emitting nations, must take responsibility for helping those who are suffering the consequences, often low-emitting nations. This creates a moral obligation for more developed countries to support vulnerable populations. And that leads us to the principle of justice itself. Corrective justice, in this context, demands that developed nations do their part by funding climate adaptation efforts, water management initiatives, and resettlement programs. Essentially, justice calls for those who have contributed most to the problem to help address its impacts. All of this ties back to our overall theme. Ethical responsibility isn't just a moral ideal. It's a necessary step toward a more equitable and sustainable future for everyone. Let's start by recognizing that our urgent priority right now is human resources. Ensuring the well-being of people is fundamental, especially in times of crisis. Alongside that, we must focus on protecting essential resources like health, food, and water. These are the basics that sustain life. Our approach needs to be practical and survival-oriented, meaning we should prioritize actions that have immediate, tangible benefits for human survival. Now, when we talk about environmentalism, some people refer to it as shallow ecology. This perspective emphasizes protecting the environment mainly because it benefits human existence. It's a more anthropocentric view, meaning humans are seen as the central or most important species, and nature's value is often considered in terms of its usefulness to us. The shallow ecology framework is focused on these human-centered reasons for environmental protection. It's important to understand that this perspective is different from more radical ecological viewpoints, which see nature as having intrinsic value beyond its utility to humans. In the context of our overall theme, this highlights a pragmatic, survival-focused approach to environmental issues, one that recognizes the importance of protecting our environment, but primarily for the sake of human survival and well-being. Vulnerable nations often lack the robust systems needed to handle the increasing burden of preventable illnesses. When we think about infrastructure, it's clear that many of these countries don't have the facilities or resources to effectively manage health crises. For example, as temperatures rise due to climate change, the geographical range of diseases like malaria, dengue, and Zika is expanding into new regions. This means more populations are at risk, especially where health systems are already strained. Another major concern is waterborne diseases. Flooding, which is becoming more frequent and severe, contaminates drinking water supplies. This leads to outbreaks of cholera, diarrhea, and typhoid, illnesses that can spread rapidly and cause serious health issues. Overall, what we're seeing is a clear escalation in health and disease risks connected to climate change. The combination of environmental changes and inadequate infrastructure makes it even harder for vulnerable nations to protect their populations. That's why strengthening health systems is so critical in addressing these emerging threats. Heat stress can have serious health impacts, including dehydration, cardiovascular failure, and respiratory distress, and these effects are seen across populations all around the world. What's particularly alarming is that these health risks can escalate rapidly during extreme heat events. The 2003 European heatwave is a stark example of this. It showed us that climate change isn't just a distant or slow-moving issue, it's an immediate threat to life. Those most vulnerable, especially people without access to adequate cooling or health care, faced devastating consequences. This event resulted in approximately 70,000 deaths, highlighting just how deadly extreme heat can be. When we look at heat-related mortality trends over time, we see a clear increase that underscores the urgency of addressing climate change now. It's not just about longer summers, it's about saving lives. This slide connects to our overall theme by illustrating that climate change is a direct, immediate danger, and we must act to protect vulnerable populations from these devastating impacts. Let's take a closer look at how the climate crisis intersects with various sustainable development goals and what that means morally. Starting with SDG 2, which is about zero hunger, we see that climate change can cause crop failures due to unpredictable weather patterns. This isn't just an agricultural issue. It's a direct violation of the fundamental human right to food. When weather becomes so erratic that crops fail, vulnerable populations suffer from hunger and malnutrition. Moving on to SDG 6, which focuses on clean water, droughts become more frequent and severe, reducing access to safe, clean water for millions of people. This isn't just an environmental problem, it's a systemic denial of a basic, life-saving resource. When communities can't access water, their health and well-being are at serious risk. Then there's SDG 3, good health. As climate change leads to increased disease outbreaks and higher mortality rates, it fundamentally threatens human dignity. When health systems are overwhelmed and preventable illnesses spread more easily, it's a stark reminder of how climate impacts our very right to health. Finally, SDG 13, climate action, highlights the lack of sufficient funding for adaptation efforts. This gap represents a failure of our global ethical responsibility to support those most affected. It's not just about numbers or policies, it's about moral commitments to protect vulnerable populations from the worst impacts of climate change. Overall, this table underscores that the climate crisis isn't just an environmental issue. It's a barrier that threatens our collective progress on the SDGs, violating our global commitments and moral obligations. It's a stark reminder that climate action is integral to upholding human rights and ensuring a just future for all. Let's talk about carrying capacity, which we can think of as the maximum amount of resources an environment can sustainably support. Mathematically, it's expressed as K equals resources divided by consumption. In other words, the capacity depends on how many resources are available and how much each person or activity uses. Now, climate change plays a significant role here because it damages ecosystems, reducing their ability to provide those vital resources. This means the environmental capacity shrinks, making it even more critical to manage our resources carefully. That's where Integrated Water Resource Management, or IWRM, comes into the picture. It's all about finding that balance, making sure that agricultural, industrial, and household needs are met fairly, without overtaxing the environment. So, when we talk about defining resource limits, especially in terms of water, it's essential to understand that our carrying capacity is directly affected by how well we manage these resources within the ecological limits. This concept ties into the larger theme of sustainable development, ensuring that we meet current needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. Today, I want to talk about how we can avoid exploiting vulnerable refugees. It's crucial that we ensure they have access to health care and education, because these are basic rights that should never be compromised, especially in times of crisis. Respecting their cultural identity and dignity is also essential. They must be treated with compassion and understanding, recognizing their backgrounds and humanity. Developed nations have a particular responsibility here. Since their emissions have contributed significantly to climate change, which reduces the Earth's carrying capacity, they should be actively funding fair and equitable policies to support those affected. Rising sea levels and desertification are forcing communities to leave their ancestral lands. But resettlement isn't just about physical relocation. It's about supporting these communities emotionally, culturally, and socially, helping them rebuild lives beyond just moving from one place to another. This leads us to the policy dilemmas around resettlement. We need solutions that are fair, sustainable, and respectful of those displaced. It's a complex challenge, but one that requires our collective care, responsibility, and action. Let's take a moment to consider the importance of resource protection. It's not just an environmental issue, it's a practical necessity for human survival. When we talk about shallow ecology, we're emphasizing the need for accountability. We must acknowledge the harm caused in the past and support efforts to make things right financially. Justice plays a crucial role here, ensuring fairness and rectifying historical wrongs. This brings us to our group conclusion. Climate justice is fundamentally about protecting human dignity, ensuring fairness for everyone, and safeguarding the future for coming generations. Finally, the moral synthesis reminds us that addressing these issues isn't just about policies or numbers. It's about doing what's right. It's about recognizing our shared responsibility and acting with integrity to create a sustainable and just world for all. Now, let's briefly look at the key references that have informed this presentation. First, we have Hassing's work from 2025, which delves into the ethics of climate change, exploring the moral responsibilities we hold as individuals and societies. Then, there's UNESCO's 2023 publication on the ethical principles of climate change, providing a global perspective on the values and standards we should uphold. Lastly, Fritz's 2024 piece discusses the virtue of shallow environmentalism, encouraging us to think about how even small, everyday actions can contribute positively to environmental ethics. These references underscore the importance of ethical considerations in addressing climate change and remind us that our approach must be grounded in moral responsibility and virtue. As we wrap up, I invite any questions or thoughts you might have. Thank you all for your attention and engagement today. Let's take a closer look at some of the sources behind this information. First, we have data from ClimateRefugees.org, which highlights the growing issue of climate-induced displacement, showing how communities are forced to leave their homes due to extreme weather events and rising sea levels. Next, the image from MDG Monitor. Org illustrates the Global Sustainable Development Goals, emphasizing clean water and sanitation, which are crucial in addressing health impacts and ensuring sustainable communities. Then, we see a visual from Borgen Project, org that underscores the importance of strengthening healthcare systems, especially in developing countries, to better handle climate-related health crises. Lastly, the picture from Vectizi. Com vividly depicts the severe drought and dry, cracked earth caused by climate change, reminding us of the tangible environmental impacts we're facing. Together, these sources paint a comprehensive picture. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, but a human one, affecting health, displacement, and water security worldwide. Understanding these connections helps us see why addressing climate change is essential for achieving global sustainability and resilience.